Yeah. Good morning. There was a grammar school teacher who asked her class to just write out what they felt was the greatest thing in all the world. And one little girl wrote, "The greatest thing in life is to grow and grow forever and ever." Now, if you apply that to the physical, that wouldn't quite be what we'd want to do. We don't want to grow and grow forever and ever, although sometimes I feel like I am growing and growing forever and ever. But at the spiritual level, our spiritual awareness, to grow and grow our consciousness, our awareness that we're a spiritual being having a human experience, then I would say she's on to something. In our four Gospels, there are probably more questions than answers. One of the questions that comes up is, we're told in the story, especially in the Gospel of Luke, that Jesus, at age 12, when they went to Jerusalem for the Passover, went and visited the temple and started talking with some of their esteemed teachers, had a conversation, and they were just amazed at how well learned this young boy was. But then we don't hear anything about him until he's age 30. Now, a very logical explanation for that is back in those days at Jewish town halls or community get-togethers, you weren't allowed to get up and talk until you were 30. And they felt that by the time you got to that age, you had gained enough wisdom that you had something worthwhile to say. But there is, as far as our little girl saying to grow and grow forever and ever, in the Gospel of Luke, 2nd chapter, 52nd verse, right after he's had his 12 as he visited the temple when he was 12 years old, we're told by the writer of the Gospel of Luke, "And Jesus increased in wisdom and in stature and in favor with God and with man." Back when Carl and I were serving a congregation down in Florida, as we started, every congregation has its interesting personalities. And we had a woman that someone had warned us about. I'll call her Helen. Helen would pop up in the middle of a service and start to talk, or start to yell, or start to scream. As time went by, I discovered that Helen was a schizophrenic, and so Helen would pop up from time to time, and the ushers would escort her out. And so I decided I wanted to engage and have a conversation with her. And as we get to the end of this lesson, I'll talk about just how that unfolded. But it's interesting how in working with relationships with people, we start out this physical body in a collaboration. First our father and our mother come together, and suddenly this body starts to form in collaboration with the mother. And just before the birth, the soul enters the body, and there's a consciousness that you may be a separate entity. And of course, then the walls collapse, and there's this panic, and you're pushed out this very small opening, and suddenly you're feeling air in your lungs and air on your skin, and you find yourself in a dependence on other people. And you really can't do much on your own, can you? So you learn very carefully that you need to manipulate others to act in accordance with your preferences, because you can't communicate very well. And unfortunately, that starts a pattern that a lot of us carry on for the rest of our lives. And there's also a reconciliation that needs to happen. Suddenly, we've gone from feeling a oneness with another person to feeling apart. And that separateness needs to be reconciled over time. It is part of our spiritual journey to recognize that even though it might appear that we are separate from others, that we really aren't. And there's a big difference between being alone and being lonely. And it's fascinating, especially for, I know the majority of us are city dwellers, but it's interesting how even in a city where we're in close proximity to each other, it doesn't guarantee that we won't feel loneliness. Sometimes someone who lives out, say, in rural Indiana miles from anybody else has more of a sense of contentment than, say, somebody who's living in a high-rise condominium here in town. There's a saying, I don't know who came up with it, but we rub elbows with millions but hearts with few. Do we have a willingness to open our heart to others, to reveal ourselves, and to trust that the other person will feel that connectedness, know that there's something much larger than just the two of us? Have you ever felt lonely? Are you feeling lonely right now? Each of us has a continuous flow of energy available to us. We just need to become aware that we're spiritual beings having a human experience, and that there is this flow of divine energy that can re-energize us and energize others. One of its expressions is love, to express love. I know when I teach the prosperity principles, I talk about that idea that substance can be formed into anything, and when it comes to your financial needs, that's true, but a lot of people have been conditioned to think otherwise. But I say, well, when you express love, you notice how that energy comes from someplace and just gushes forth from you. It may not be visible, but where did it come from? And isn't it interesting that the next time you go to express love, there's just as much or more there to express? We do, however, though, through our attitudes and through our fears, choke off that flow of energy at times. You know, remember the song from the 1980s, Looking for Love in All the Wrong Places. You know, where do you look for your love? Truth is, a lot of us have operated in fear, at least at one point or another in our life. We're looking for love and acceptance from people out here rather than from within. And ironically, one of the tools for understanding that oneness that we have with everyone else is meditation. To just sit quietly and go into the within, that incredible place where we can get in touch with God as we know God to be. And in there, all pretense of separation just drops away. Separation between you and me, and separation between God and me, and God and you. But it does allow for that sense of communion, common union of all of our souls and all of our energies. Another name for it is transcendental love. You know, it goes beyond eros, you know, the erotic love, or as I'm trying to think who Joseph Campbell quoted as saying, eros is the zeal of the organs for each other. It goes beyond family love, being able to say love the members of our family and love each other and get to that often unattainable, unconditional love. Seems like so often we want to have some sort of condition tagged to it. But then there is that transcendental love that seems to go beyond everything. And occasionally we can break through to that and express it more and more. You see, we're all connected. And one of the challenges we have in our life is to be able to gravitate towards love rather than towards fear. There are divine ideas, as I've described. We open our mind to the divine mind and divine ideas come to us. And each of us has a choice as to whether to embrace two divine ideas. There comes a point in your life where you have to make the decision. And that's the divine idea of divine guidance and the divine idea of divine protection. Guidance and protection. Are you willing to allow your conscious mind to be guided through your intuition? And are you willing to believe that you will be protected from harm? Now, I'm not saying you won't die someday, but just be protected from harm. That God will guide you to stay away from useless, unnecessary suffering. All of us have our ups and downs. Because if we don't, we're living our life according to the five senses, to the outer appearances. We're looking for love in all the wrong places. And yet we recognize that something's missing. And we try to operate on these outer appearances, and unfortunately that's the way a lot of people live their lives. And without that embracing the divine idea of prosperity, we find ourselves struggling in areas of our life like health and occupation and relationships and money. We live life on the defensive. We're in fear. We're afraid that somebody's going to take away our stuff, or someone's going to take advantage of us. You'll hear someone say stuff like, well, that's life for you. Now, that's not life for you. That's a very poor substitute for life. There's a richness in knowing that we're spiritual beings having a human experience. Now, there's going to be people who list their reasons why the world isn't cooperating with them. They say things, well, you don't understand the way they treat me. You don't understand my circumstances. You don't understand what it's like to be there. Nobody knows the trouble I've seen. It's much easier to blame someone else. To blame someone else out there. It's his fault that I'm angry. It's his fault that I'm fearful. It's his fault that I'm worried. It's his fault that I'm upset. It's his fault that I'm depressed. As I expressed in last week's lesson, walking into a Unity church and hearing the minister say, are you ready to take responsibility for everything you've experienced in your life? It's like, wow. What a shift. That's why you and I need to go within before we can go without. When we go within, we get centered every day, and we're able to just handle whatever's thrown at us for the day. See, the good news is that life is difficult, but we have the tools to handle whatever is thrown at us. Now, it has been said that life is set in a framework of human relations. There's those infamous words of Rodney King about 20 years ago, can't we all just get along? On a daily basis, we interact with other people. Now, there have been, days where perhaps we cocoon, but, as time goes by, we start to recognize that there is an aspect of health and of mental wellness to be able to interact with other people. And what I've noticed in the Unity congregations that I've been a part of is how we're brought together with like-minded people so that we can see the divine in the others. We can bring out the best in each other. We can see past the momentary drama or the temporality. We all have quirks. And the challenge is to see through the eyes of love rather than through the eyes of fear. Now, that may be much different than liking everybody. But are you focused on finding fault in another? Or are you focused on finding common ground? Because whatever we focus on expands. Are we willing to see the good that's coming out of the situation? Be willing to heal our feelings of unworthiness. In the Gospel of Matthew, 22nd chapter, 34th verse, Jesus is teaching. But it starts with the 34th verse. The Pharisees heard that Jesus had silenced the Sadducees. One of them, a lawyer, went where they had come together and asked him a question to trick him. And the lawyer said, "Teacher, which is the great commandment in the Scriptures?" And Jesus said to him, "You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your mind. This is the great and first commandment. And the second is like it. You shall love your neighbor as yourself. On these two commandments depend all the Scriptures." Now, what has always fascinated me about this passage is the way it's worded in English. You shall love your neighbor as yourself. And I have observed that over and over and over again, because if you are self-loathing, you are going to loathe the people around you. If you have a certain capacity, and as I've talked about before, so many of us are dealing with some level of unworthiness. And so if we have that level of unworthiness, isn't it interesting how we're projected onto other people? And then they'll come into our life and help us feel unworthy. So it is the manner in which you can accept yourself that you'll find you start to accept others. Recently I learned that someone was not speaking very kindly of me. As a minister, it's something, I've had to deal with since, even before I emerged from the seminary. I had some interesting dust-up with some of my classmates, which It was all part of the process to learn about each other. Now, I really had to examine what this person was saying about me, and I thought, well, there is a kernel of truth there that I really need to look at, that I could do better at. But then I recognized most of the rest of it was not about me. And I knew enough about this person to recognize that this person had issues with their father, and so they were projecting it on me. But you see, first thing I had to do was recognize what part of it did resonate with me. And I know those of you who've taken the Unity orientation class that we offer about twice a year, and you have to take that orientation to become a member. Those of you who've gone through it since Carla and I started 3 years ago, I talk about family system theory, because it's something important to understand in any congregation, whether you're Unity or you're Southern Baptist. And that is that for some reason, in a spiritual center, in a truth center like we have, people want to heal their family stuff. So they project their stuff onto other people, and generally, we aren't conscious of it. So if someone has a problem with their father, they'll project it onto me. If someone has a problem with their mother, they'll project it onto Carla. If they have a problem with their brother or their sister, they'll project it onto you. Or maybe they got a problem with a cousin or someone else. And there's that part of them that wants to heal this thing, so why not stir up trouble with you? And so I do this sort of so that members understand that when they're in this where you suddenly find yourself in some sort of a conflict with another member of the congregation, be willing to, okay, I own my part of this, but I haven't got a clue as to what the rest of this is about. But what it does is it allows us to maybe dig a little bit deeper and find out what is the need here. What is the unmet need of this person? Maybe they don't feel safe. Maybe, or maybe, like say, they're afraid of being taken advantage of. What is it? That may be causing this little rift here. So, love thy neighbor as thyself. And notice that Jesus didn't qualify that and say, as long as I can choose my neighbors. The Gospel of Luke, 6th chapter, 22nd verse, Jesus talks about loving your enemies. Not only loving your enemies, but be willing to do good to them. Be willing to go above and beyond the call of duty. He didn't say it would be easy, but the idea is being willing to express love rather than fear in a situation. I know in the Catholic tradition and the Anglican tradition, there'll be these saints, people who've gained sainthood. And there's a common thread in each one of them, and that is they have broken past the outer appearances. And they've recognized there's something deeper, and they've been able to express love in a particular way. They've been able to apply the divine laws, in this physical world. And if you're feeling like you could never be a saint, Jesus, in the Gospel of John, 14th chapter, 13th verse says, these things and greater things shall you do. Greater things shall you do. We all have that possibility of being able to embrace these divine ideas and express them. Now, we may not be able to express them all the time. We may not even be able to express them 50% of the time. But it's a start. Another challenge is to be willing to engage people who are not like us. It can be very easy, of course, to come here, to Unity, get together for fellowship after the service. But it doesn't give us the opportunity to heal sometimes. By willing to look at what we believe and what our preferences are. There's a human tendency to want to run with a tribe. And I look at the current polarization in politics. The book by Ann Coulter, How to Speak to a Liberal If You Must. Fox News and Rush Limbaugh saying, don't pay attention to those people. It's not worth having a conversation with them. Come to me and I'll tell you what the news is and what it means. When you insulate yourself like that, or when I insulate myself like that, I'm not opening myself up to seeing the other worldview, seeing how other people are perceiving what's going on. And then we can have a very healthy conversation about it. And look at what's happening, on the other side of the world with ISIL. I touched on this last week. We've got the Muslim fundamentalists fighting with the Christian fundamentalists, who are fighting with the Muslim fundamentalists, who are fighting with the Zoroastrianism fundamentalists, because they know they're right. Would you rather be right, or would you rather be happy? And what I've noticed in each one of these is they appeal to your fear. They want you to let go of the love and embrace the fear. And then they'll tell you that that person is the enemy and they're trying to ruin things. So they appeal to your sense of justice. Because everyone knows that President Obama is a Kenyan Muslim terrorist trying to ruin the United States, right? That's the kind of extremism that'll happen, but you'll be darned if suddenly there isn't a group of people taking up arms and going with it. So, when we do that, we're not dialoguing. And it can be very healthy to have a dialogue. We recognize whether or not we are coming from love or from fear. Isn't it interesting that sometimes it is the most confused, the most angry, the most depraved person that if you are willing to just come from love, you can see that person crying out, "Why won't someone listen to me? Why won't someone hear me? Why won't someone love me?" And that's why we need to know ourselves, warts and all. To know that when someone comes to us and they're acting in a way we do not prefer, that we can just recognize, okay, what part of this is me and what part of this is this person? And can I help this person perhaps move past this very lonely place that they are? Otherwise, we start auditioning people. You know how it is. I mean, you look at your life and how it's unfolded, especially when you're younger. You audition people by finding out if they think the way you think and if they behave the way you behave. They must pass that test of our preferences. The young people who are dating, oh, he's so cute, or she's so beautiful. And, and they're more worried about the outer appearances, and then they get to know the person. And that's the fascinating thing for me. And, as you know, Carl and I have been together now 29 years. I mean, each of us has things that the other person does that I'd prefer that she didn't do. And that she'd prefer that I didn't do. But early on when I'd be dating someone, as soon as that person started acting the way I didn't like them, well, this isn't going to work. Now it's just kind of like, no big deal. Granted, I'd prefer that she do it a different way, but I can live with this. And that's that maturity that comes in and recognizing that that other people don't have to behave the way I think they should behave, or the way I'd prefer they behave. So regardless of our preferences, can we express namaste, from the Hindu and Buddhist tradition? That sense of, you see they come together with their hands and bow. It is a tradition there which calls, anytime they meet someone new or even an old friend, they say namaste. I behold the divine in you. I am open and receptive to the lessons that I need to learn from you, and I am open to and receptive to allowing my expression of love to you, teach you what it is you've come to learn. We break past the outer appearances. We break past the first impressions. I know when Carl and I were serving this congregation down in Florida, we went there for our audition weekend. We had a workshop that we were doing on Saturday, and there was this one guy that I noticed that everybody seemed to be avoiding. And so we paired up to do an exercise, and nobody paired up with him. So I went and paired up with him. For one hand, I recognized I was setting an example, but whatever. In getting to know this fellow, his name was Bill. For those of you who've seen the movie Rain Man, he was like Rain Man. He was kind of that, he did not have very good social skills, but he was a brilliant guy. And of course part of it was, he was a bit unkempt with his clothes and stuff like that, but, he wasn't homeless. He was living someplace. But, so people would just kind of avoid him because he's different. And yet he became a vital part of our congregation. He would volunteer in the bookstore. Once you got past those outer appearances, I mean, this guy knew everything about everything as far as books and the like. So it's easy to express namaste to someone who you like. But can you say namaste to that person? You go, yeah, yeah. That's where you need to really say namaste. I behold the divine in you. What an interesting disguise you have come forward with. Let me see if I can see past it. And then you find yourself truly being able to express love to someone who just a few minutes before you never would have imagined being able to express love to. So there's a human tendency that whenever we go to a new place, like when we moved here 3.5 years ago, people say you need to make new friends. I have found that I've never been able to make new friends. What I am able to do, though, is be a friend to others, and then the friendship naturally occurs. We can be placed in proximity with other people, but there's some people we're just not going to resonate with. That's no big deal. But if I can express friendship to someone, if I can express, how can I help you? And then I find that starts to open up things so that we can have a healthy relationship. The truth is, getting along with people is about 2% about who they are. The other 98% is about how we perceive them, how we react to them, the meaning we place upon their behavior. So when we find ourselves slipping into that old paradigm of manipulating others, and find ourselves saying things like, well, that's the way people are. I know Eric Butterworth, I remember hearing one of his recordings, and he said, the problem is that you're dealing with people. Don't deal with people. Deal with persons. While you can claim that people are all alike, well, yeah, we all have some similarities. But persons, individuals, they're unique. They have specific needs that perhaps you don't have. Of course, we all share many needs, but what is it that they're trying to express? And can we open with our compassion and empathy to be able to have that interchange? Now, I'm not saying that you have to like everyone. I'm not saying you have to hang out with everyone. Back, of course, we've been experiencing this whole Ferguson, Missouri thing. I remember back, I think it was about 20 years ago, Bill Cosby put it very well when it came to race relations. He says, look, I'm not asking you to give me a hug and a kiss. I'm not even asking you to walk across the street to talk to me. I'm just asking you to leave me alone. Why do you feel like you need to get in my face and oppress me? And it was very well put. There's a sense that, yeah, we're not going to want to hang with everyone. And that's okay. But we don't have to condone disruptive behavior. I know two of the most challenging times I had one was dealing with a sociopath. And that person, over time I started recognizing how destructive they were being in that particular environment that I was in. And so basically, I just had to cut ties with that person and ask that person not to come back. Because I recognized that while I can say namaste and see the Christ in the person, the fact that the person was stirring up trouble each time with the behavior and would not correct that behavior, no matter how many times we talked about it, I had to say, look, this just isn't working. It's not worth tearing down the whole organization, just so that you can continue to behave this way. Now, earlier I mentioned a woman down in Florida who is a schizophrenic. So she would have her eruptions at times, and so I'd have some one-on-one conversations with her, by phone, and she'd come by, the office. We'd set up an appointment and talk for about an hour. And, she did have some concerns about the theology. She was a Mormon, and the Mormons had basically kicked her out of their congregation because she was disruptive. So I expressed to her, and after a couple of times I said, look, Helen, I can't have you here on Sundays if you're going to do this. People come because, we want to share some spiritual lessons. And while you may have a disagreement or you may have something you want to express, this isn't the platform for you to do that. But we'd have some very nice conversations about theology and differences, and we talk about it. And it's funny because one time she brought a friend of hers in, and after having a conversation with a little bit, I realized that this friend really didn't want to be there and really didn't want to debate her Catholicism. It was interesting because having grown up Catholic, I could talk to her, and I said, well, it's fine. I mean, if that works for you, I'm not the one who's going to say you need to change what you believe and how you operate spiritually. But for a while, we had not seen Helen there at the congregation. I thought, well, that's interesting. I'm wondering why. And then I get a call from Helen's husband, and she has cancer throughout her body. Can I come see her? Of course I'd come see her. And I went to their house, and as many people in that situation, she was in a hospital bed in the living room. And I had a conversation with Helen, and we talked and we prayed together. And she said, Bob, I really want you to do my funeral. Would you be willing to do my funeral? I said, yes, of course. I'll be glad to do your funeral. And she said, I always appreciated Unity because, while I had gone to other places and gone to church, I knew that I always need to be there because when I was at Unity, I could feel the love. I could feel the people expressing love to me. It was a good lesson for me. And it was a good affirmation about what Unity was like. Because after her one eruption where she got up and took great issue with what I was talking about and marched out, I said to everybody, okay, now I want you to just shift your attitude. Right now, get in touch with what you're feeling at this moment. Now, if I were to tell you that this person is really struggling with their spirituality and bringing into reconciliation their fundamentalist view compared to the Unity view, would you shift what it is you're feeling right now and express love to her, even though she's not in the room? And she could feel it. So it's a good lesson. Namaste. Another may be blocking their expression of the divine. But the one gift we can give to other people is to not label them, not to declare that the way they are is the way they always will be. We can allow that this person can change. And it's very easy to do when you realize how much you personally have changed. I know how much I've changed just over the last couple of years. Not to mention changing from the way I was in my 20s. Oh, you would have loved me in my 20s. Now, there are a couple of books I can recommend to you. One of them, of course, is a book that we use in our Fearless Living class, which we do about once a year, and that's The Eye of the Storm by Gary Simmons. Eye of the Storm with Gary Simmons. And instead of the I that you have in your head, the I is the letter I. Eye of the Storm. And the other one is Nonviolent Communication. Nonviolent Communication. That's written by Marshall Rosenberg. Marshall Rosenberg. It's a very good way. It's a wonderful book on how to have conversations with other people without putting them on the defensive. So, secrets to healthy relationships. Are you willing to meditate, to go within, to understand the lessons that are going to come to you in that day? Are you willing to heal and release manipulative and disruptive behavior? Are you willing to allow yourself and others to change for the better? And are you willing to live? Namaste. I want to share with you now a 3-minute video by Steve Hartman of the CBS Evening News. It's about a teacher in New Jersey who recognized when someone was crying out, "Won't somebody please love me?"
Thank you.
This really shouldn't be happening. Statistically, as a foster kid, Gina Pearson was more likely to wind up behind bars than under a mortarboard. And yet here she is, graduating from Rutgers University in New Jersey with a degree in social work.
Congratulations to the class of 2000.
With a master's ahead of her and so much baggage behind her. See, Gina didn't live in just one foster home.
I would just always act out or something, and then I would either get kicked out of the home or I would just run away or something like that.
And how many times would that happen?
A lot, like 30.
30?
Yeah.
30 foster homes, from first grade right through high school, where freshman math teacher Cheryl Lynn Straubmuller remembers her behavior
Okay, you guys ready?
all too well.
She had her own voice, wanted to be heard. And,
Sounds like you're putting a positive spin on this. Sounds like a nightmare,
she was
actually.
rough at first.
Yeah. Okay, tell me like it is.
She was very rough at first. She's in the classroom, and the next thing I know, I get hit upside the head with a golf ball.
She threw a golf ball at you?
She threw a golf ball in my direction and hit me in the head.
And that was just one episode. Mrs. Straubmuller had dozens of other reasons to suggest Gina for expulsion.
Self-arrest.
But instead, she took a different tack.
She sent me an email and she asked me to babysit the kids.
Wait, she invited you to her house to babysit her kids? Why would she trust you? You don't know?
I think she just saw something that I didn't even see in myself.
Saw it and cultivated it long after Gina was out of her class.
She was so consistent in sitting with me every day, even though she may have had something else to do, and we would just talk. She kind of helped me find myself.
Mrs. Straubmuller encouraged Gina to buckle down, talked her into going to college, and the rest is future.
I'm so proud of her. I really am so proud. She's made her own way. She realized what brain she had and she finally used it. That's the best part about it.
This graduation season, every kid under cap and gown should be able to point to at least one person who made it all possible.
Congratulations, you're so welcome.
And if they're as wise as their degrees suggest, they will take Gina's advice to not just say thank you to that person, but to show thank you.
Continuing to strive for success and for greatness, that is my thank you to her. I love you. I love you too so much.
Steve Hartman, on the road in New Brunswick, New Jersey.
Gospel of Matthew, 22nd chapter, 36th verse. Teacher, which is the great commandment in the Scriptures? And Jesus said to him, you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, all your soul, and all your mind. This is the great and first commandment. And the second one is like it. You shall love your neighbor as yourself. On these two commandments depend all the Scriptures. And may you always be open to God's guidance and grace.